Nancy Roberts, and I'm an economics professor at Arizona State University. I want to continue our discussion that we're having about trade, and I'll start with a graph that we've used in a previous video, where we have the domestic economy, domestic supply, domestic demand, and we saw consumer and producer surplus when the economy was closed. And we figured when a closed economy, I had $4,000 consumer surplus, $4,000 producer, for a total of $8,000. One half based on type, one half based on type. And then I said, well, what if we allow imports into the country, because there's some other country out there that can make these shoes, that's right, these were shoes, that can make these shoes at a lower price than $30. And so if we do that, if we allow those foreign imports into the country, new price is $15, 700 is the quantity demanded at a price of $15, 100 of those will be supplied domestically, and 600 of those will be imported. And then we can look at consumer and producer surplus when we have free trade. And consumer surplus then includes all of this area here, one half based on type, which is 12,250, and producer surplus includes just this tiny area here, which is $250. So my total surplus in the area is 12,500 when we have free trade, compared with 8,000 when we have a closed economy. So you should not be surprised that domestic producers of shoes are not happy with this situation. And so what they often do is lobby for protectionism, for restrictions on imports into the country. And we have two different ways in which we can restrict imports into the country. One way is using a tariff, which is a tax. Another way is using quotas, which is just setting limits and saying, okay, you can only bring in this many. Now, let's work on the tariff today, the tariff problem. The situation is this. Domestic producers will say to the legislature, look how many jobs we've lost. We used to make 400 shoes a time period. Now we're only making 100, so we've lost some jobs here. So, you need to help us out here. Look at the domestic industry. It's suffering because of this foreign competition. And so legislators will often impose a tariff on shoes that are imported into the country. And so what they will say, remember, here's my supply curve now that I have these foreign imports coming into the country. What the government will often do is they'll say, okay, go ahead, bring the shoes in, but every time you bring shoes into the country, you foreigners that are bringing shoes into the country have to pay us a tariff. You have to give us, the government, a tax or a tariff. And so let's assume that in this case, the government has said to the foreign country that's bringing shoes into our country, you have to pay us a tariff such that the price is now $20. In other words, we're going to make these importers of shoes pay. So you've just increased their costs. So here's my new, let's just make it $20 because we've increased the price $5 with this tariff. So my new supply curve, instead of being here, is now here. And so that means that the quantity demanded is going to be 200, the domestic quantity supplied is going to be 200, and the quantity demanded is going to be 600. So here's our picture now. We've imposed a tariff on the country that's importing shoes into our domestic economy, raises the price to $20. So now domestic producers are willing to supply 200 shoes at this new price of $20, and domestic consumers, instead of buying 700 shoes at $15, are now only going to buy 600 shoes at $20. Quantity demanded decreases. Okay, so what we want to do is examine how this affects the economy. You know, when we have free trade, we have $12,500 worth of surplus in the economy going to consumers and producers. Okay, well, let's just label these areas and we can identify them, and then we'll actually calculate, do the arithmetic and calculate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and area 10. Okay, when we had free trade, consumer surplus was area 1 through 9. But now the price is higher because of this tariff, so consumer surplus is now 1, 2, 3, and 4. Consumers have lost all of this. But domestic producers, when we had free trade, producer surplus was 10. Now producer surplus is 5 and 10, so domestic producers have gained. So area 5 used to belong to consumer surplus when we had free trade. Now it belongs to producer surplus. So it's just a wealth transfer. No big deal. 6, 7, 8, and 9. These all used to be consumer surplus when we had free trade. They're not consumer surplus anymore. Where are they? Well, in fact, what we've done is we've introduced a new actor into our economy. Before, we just had consumers and producers. Now we have consumers, producers, and the government who's collecting this tariff. So in fact, areas 7 and 8, because these are my imports right here, these 200 through 600, so 400 are going to be imported. And the government's going to collect $5 on each of these 400 imports. So 7 and 8 aren't lost to the economy, they're transferred from consumers to the government. So that's still wealth within the economy. We could argue about whether or not we should do that, but that's another discussion. It's in the economy, it hasn't left the economy. So now we're left with 6 and 9. Who gets 6 and 9? And the answer is nobody gets 6 and 9. It's a loss to the economy. And in fact, we can measure consumer surplus, producer surplus, and the government revenue, and we can compare it with what our number is when free trade. So consumer surplus is going to be areas 1, 2, 3, and 4, and it's $9,000 is consumer surplus. 1/2 base times height, $9,000. Producer surplus, this is when we introduced the tariff. Producer surplus is area 5 and 10, which is $1,000. Tariff revenue that the government collects, they're going to collect $5 on 400 units. So the government is going to collect $2,000. And so when we add all this up, we get $12,000. Compare this with $12,500. The economy's just lost $500. The economy has lost areas 6 and 9. And what you should be able to see by looking at this is the higher the tariff that you impose, the bigger these little triangles 6 and 9 become. If instead of imposing just $5 tariff, we imposed a $10 tariff, then my new line would be through here, and my triangle 6 and 9, there's 6, and here's 9. You see how much bigger they become, and the loss gets bigger and bigger. So we can see that restricting free trade, while it benefits some in the economy, it costs others, and it ends up costing more than it benefits. So the net effect is a loss to the economy when we use tariffs to restrict free trade. So in our next video, we're going to look at restricting free trade using quotas. So come back.